All right, so welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Today is the 12th class in a 12-month series that I've been doing based on the book How Not to Die. Each month we've gone through one of Dr. Greger's kind of prescribed recommendations for how to prevent chronic disease. Okay? And to let you know a little bit, Dr. Greger is a physician. He is a world-renowned speaker, best-selling author, and he basically decided a while back that when he looked at the top 15 causes of death or mortality in America, the vast majority are lifestyle-related of the top 15. And so he's kind of made it his mission to pour through the thousands and thousands of nutrition studies that come out each year and break it down to what the bottom line is for the average consumer, right? Because how many of us are confused all the time by the mix of nutrition messages we get? So he tries to break it down to the bare bones. And then he also said that, you know, what this is showing is what we eat and how we live our lives has a huge impact on our development of chronic disease, as well as how the outcome of those diseases may be. So he offers what he calls his daily dozen, which is the 12 things that he recommends that we eat or do each day to try to prevent chronic disease and maintain our health. So over the past year, in 2017, we started in January, and I had one class each month dedicated to one of his specific daily dozen. So today's the last one in that series. I'm not sure there's been anybody that's made it to all 12, but the vast majority of them are recorded, so you're welcome to listen to them online. So today is kind of exercise, and then we're also going to do a little bit of kind of a wrap-up of like, okay, what now? You've told us all these things. What do we do with this information? How do we incorporate it into our life? So let's talk about the obesity epidemic. This is nothing that probably any of us have not already heard to a certain extent. But basically, 2/3 of Americans are considered overweight or obese, as well as children. Childhood obesity has tripled over the last couple decades. And researchers, this is coming from Dr. Greger, researchers a lot of times in the food industry like to say that it's because of our physical inactivity. How many times have we heard that? You know, oh, we sit at a desk all the time. You know, we don't get up, we have yard guys, or we have, you know, delivery grocery services, so we don't have to do anything. That's the cause of the problem. And this has been largely perpetuated by the food industry, people who have a little bit of skin in the game, right? And so they've said that the biggest public health problem of the 21st century is our inactivity, okay? However, when we really look at it, what Dr. Greger talks about is, although the food industry is blaming inactivity, in the past several decades, our amount of movement has actually increased some. So that's not really accurate. Also, part of the problem is that our caloric intake is exceeding our expenditure. In other words, we're taking in a lot more calories than we're putting out. Okay? Even though we may be moving more, we're still exceeding, right, the number of calories we're burning. And the example he gives that adults nowadays consume the equivalent of a Big Mac extra per day compared to the 1970s. So when you think about that, so we eat the exact same as people in the 1970s, plus at the end of the day, the equivalent of a Big Mac. That's quite a bit of calories, right? Because those pack a punch. So this is what's really kind of causing the problem. Also, when you start looking at risk factors for death, physical inactivity ranks about number 5, whereas diet is the greatest killer, and smoking is is second to that. Now we know that our smoking in the United States has decreased quite a bit, right? Since the tobacco industry was kind of uncovered and all that kind of stuff. So now diet really seems to be the big issue. And this is why Dr. Greger has kind of written this book and is trying to drive all this home to us. So why exercise? If we are seeing that physical inactivity maybe isn't the biggest problem, why would we exercise? So first of all, let's look at some of the benefits. And you guys have probably heard a lot of these. Healthy body weight, right? Now, Exercise, unfortunately, is not going to burn quite as many calories as we think it does, right? We always grossly underestimate how much we're eating and grossly overestimate how many calories we're burning, right? But it can help with maintaining a good body weight. It also boosts our immune system, prevents and can help treat high blood pressure. It improves our mood. Anybody have that feeling of like before you exercise, you like don't want to do it, and then afterwards there's that lift, kind of that boost, right? So it definitely enhances our mood. It can also improve the quality of sleep. And when you look at the research, when our sleep is better, what do you then want to get up and do the next day? Exercise, right? It's also linked to making healthier nutrition choices too when we have better sleep. So it all kind of goes together, right? Also shown to reverse mild cognitive decline and much more. I mean, we could go on and on. We could do a whole entire class just on the benefits of physical activity and movement on a regular basis. So Dr. Greger's recommendation is 1 serving a day, which, yes, seems a little steep, that 90 minutes, right, of moderate intensity activity, which would be walking, jogging, swimming, biking, gardening, anything like that at kind of a moderate pace, enough to get your heart rate up, enough to where you can probably talk and have conversation during the exercise, but not so intense that you're out of breath. Now, if you want to do a little bit more intense exercise, then you can reduce your time to 40 minutes a day, right, of vigorous activity. Now, this is his prescription, and we'll kind of look at some reasons why, because I know everyone's going, well, that seems almost impossible, right, on a regular basis. Who thinks this is feasible? You do? Yeah? Most days, maybe not 7 days a week, but more days than, maybe more the majority than the minority. So the reason his recommendation is like this, back in 2008, which is the last time the physical activity guidelines for Americans were released, they kind of reduced down the recommended amount to 20 minutes a day. Anyone have a thought on why they might do that? Previously, the recommendations were higher. So it was decreased from previous recommendations from the Surgeon General, Centers for Disease Control, as well as the American College of Sports Medicine. Why would they reduce it? It was at 30 minutes a day, and they reduced it to 20.
So people actually try to do it?
You got it. So the reason Dr. Greger's is so much higher than that is he felt like, you know what? We're trying to let people off easy. We're trying to say 20 minutes, that's doable. You know, let's get people moving. But we're not telling people the full story, which is that's really not enough to move the needle. Okay? So his is kind of more of a realistic recommendation for what's going to actually make an impact in your life more. Okay? The 20-minute recommendation is to try to just get Americans moving some. So when you look at exercise and mortality, 60 minutes a week, okay? So that could mean 1 hour, 1 day a week. That could mean 2 days a week for 30 minutes, or however you want to divide it up. That only is going to decrease mortality about 3%, okay? Not a whole lot. It's something, but not a considerable amount. If you more than double that to where it's 150 minutes per week, so that's your 30 minutes 5 times, 5 days a week, which is kind of the recommendation we most frequently hear, right? It's the one used in the DPP program, Diabetes Prevention Program. They try to encourage a minimum of 150 minutes. That is only going to really move that marker about 7%. So again, it's something, right? But it's not like, wow. Okay? You start looking, you double that to where you're doing an hour, 5 days a week, 14%. Okay? And if we get to where we're doing an hour, 7 days a week, then it's about a 24% decrease. Okay? So we see it kind of goes up from there. So this is why he's got that pretty steep exercise recommendation. Okay? We can say, do your 20 minutes a day like the guidelines for Americans are recommending, but he felt like that's doing a disservice and not telling the full story. that we're letting people think that they can, go do a little 10-minute walk 6 days a week and ward off heart disease, right? And that's not necessarily the case, okay? I know, hard to hear, right? Not what we want to hear, but at least, I don't know, I kind of come from the standpoint of, I'd rather know the full story and be informed and make my decisions accordingly than be unaware, right? So here you go, you're aware now. All right, so let's talk about some of the other issues he brings up regarding exercise. And the other thing is sedentary time. So this is time spent sitting. Y'all may want to stand up for this. So the American Cancer Society has come out and said men who sit greater than 6 hours a day have a 20% higher death rate. And for women, this was surprising to me. It's double that of men. Is that not unfair? Okay, but again, we're informed, okay? So another meta-analysis where they compiled all these different studies and looked at the results, basically said that sitting, there's a strong association with death from sitting regardless of whether or not you get exercise, okay? So you can be somebody who gets those 420 minutes of exercise a week, but if you're still spending a vast majority of your time sitting, it still can contribute to death, right? You're like, we might as well never sit down. That's right. So he's an advocate of like those treadmill desks, which, I can't promise that we can get those here. But the point is, we've got to move, right? We've got to move. Exercising is different from movement. Movement, getting up and walking around or standing, is different from exercise, and they clearly may impact different things in our body. So we got to have both. So standing for health. Standing desks actually elevate your heart rate a little bit. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because we're having to pump blood a farther range than if you're sitting and more of your body is at the same level. Also, it's been shown that standing desks can burn up to about 50 additional calories an hour. So when you start looking at the amount of time you're standing during the day or during the week or month or year, it can add up quite significantly, right? So I know some people, like our department has standing desks here. I don't know that all departments allow them. There are some people I've known here at the institution have kind of made their own makeshift standing desk out of little tables or something and books stacked up. So I think there's a YouTube. Warren Holloman, who is the former faculty wellness and well-being guru, created his own, and he said he found that there's like a YouTube video online on how to make your own standing desk. So look it up. Also, just trying to do more activities standing. For example, I should probably have you come in and stand for Wellness Wednesdays instead of sitting, right? And if you think about it, when we move, this is why it's important. When we move, we increase our blood flow, right? When we increase our blood flow, what it does is provide stability and integrity to the endothelial lining, which is like the interior lining of our blood vessels. So something else, if you have to sit, there is some research showing that turmeric and green tea may also provide this same protective effect on the endothelial lining. So if you've got to be sitting for long periods of time, sip on green tea, right? Or include some turmeric on a regular basis in your diet. So then let's also talk about, because he's a big proponent of a plant-based diet, which is what we hear from the AICR, the American Institute of Cancer Research, sorry. They also are promoting a plant-based diet. So when you exercise, one of the things that deter people is that muscle soreness that we get afterwards, right? It's not always very pleasant. So when you look at post-workout recovery, this is kind of what happens in our body. You do some form of strenuous exercise. That leads to little micro tears in your muscle, okay? Those micro tears cause inflammation. We get a buildup of lactic acid, and those two things cause soreness and ultimately poor performance. That's when you're walking like this the next day, right? That's when it hurts to go up and down the stairs. Or have you ever been so sore and then somebody will bump you and you're like, right? That's what that comes from. So there's actually foods that can help. Again, these can come from, are all coming from a plant-based sources. So citrus has been shown to kind of help reduce that lactic acid buildup. Blueberries have been shown to reduce exercise-induced inflammation. Okay? Cherries have improved recovery time and help decrease pain, especially in long-distance runners. And watermelon, when consumed prior to workout, has been shown to reduce some muscle soreness post-workout. So what he's, saying is, don't let the muscle soreness be an excuse to not work out. You're doing that plant-based diet. Some of these things can actually help prevent it. And I'm happy to send you guys the slides if you don't want to take notes on everything. Okay. Another concern with exercise is oxidative stress. Do you guys know what that is? That's when we have free radicals, basically. So if you think about it, we use oxygen to burn fuel in our body, and when we're exercising, the amount of oxygen we're using is increased. And what that leads to is the release of free radicals, okay, which has been shown to cause cancer and other things like that. It leads to DNA damage or oxidative stress. So there's some concerns that high levels of exercise may not be so good for us. But what Dr. Greger is saying, but when we eat a diet that's rich in antioxidants, it can help prevent a lot of this DNA damage, okay? And so again, that's going to be your plant-based diet, consuming things that are rich in antioxidants and other phytonutrients, all the stuff that he's prescribed and all the other daily dozen that we've covered. And from the Journal of Sports Sciences, he liked this quote, that those who eat a plant-based diet may naturally have an enhanced antioxidant defense system to counter exercise-induced oxidative stress. So if you're going to exercise, what pairs well with that is focusing on plant-based foods to help with muscle soreness as well as any kind of oxidative damage. You're shaking your head, sorry.
Because you say you have to move, but then there's still a downside to movement. There's a downside to everything.
They're
So
right.
it's like,
You're exactly right. And there's that balance, right?
yeah, it's a balance.
We gotta strike that
still
balance.
Work out an hour 7 times a day. Once a week, 7 days a week. But if you do, you can do this, you can get this too.
Right, no, you're right.
This.
And he addresses that. So let's put it all together. That was an excellent segue. Thank you. I'll pay you later. So let's kind of put it all together. So his exercise prescription is basically, the 90 minutes if possible. But more than anything, I think what he's saying is we've got to move. We're made to move. The more, the better in most cases. Now that doesn't mean you necessarily need to go out and do like an ultra marathon or something like that. Because as Serena was saying, there's a downside, right, to that. There are effects when we do take anything to the extreme. So what's realistic though? So let's look at this. And what Dr. Greger says is basically this is a book on prevention, right? And what we mean by prevention is when we eat healthier now, it helps us to avoid disease later, okay? And that's kind of ultimately what this is trying to do. But his other point is that eating a healthy diet, though, does more than just prevent disease, okay? And he does discuss in his book, has anyone read it or part of it? Okay, so he does discuss in his book that, look, to your point, you could eat perfectly healthy and you could wake up tomorrow and get hit by a bus, right? And he talks about one of his good friends who was kind of the epitome of health, ate very healthy, ran marathons, really, really fit guy, and died one day in the shower in a new wellness retreat that this man had built. When the autopsy came back, he had died of carbon monoxide poisoning from the gas-heated shower in the hotel room, okay? So things can happen, right? Eating healthy, working out, all that stuff is not a guarantee, but it can prevent certain diseases, right? But his other argument is that it does more, eating healthy does more than just prevent us from getting sick. And when we start looking at, are you guys familiar with dopamine? So what this is it's a neurotransmitter that's involved in that reward pleasure system. And the point of it is we get a flood of dopamine, which is kind of that feel-good hormone in our bodies, when we do something. It was made to motivate us to continue to do the things that would keep our bodies healthy, like eat good foods, right? Drink water, other stuff like that. But what has happened is the food industry over time has said, hey, we can manipulate foods to trigger this release of dopamine and get people to eat more of the stuff we're selling, okay? His point is this. For years and years and years and years, people have been chewing on the same leaves that they produce cocaine out of, but there hasn't ever been an addiction. But when the isolated component, or when the component of that triggers the dopamine release is isolated, then we see people addicted, right? Another really good point is, when we're talking more about food, right? There's no reports of people addicted to bananas, right? Yet they're loaded with sugar. But when we isolate that sugar, we've got these people that can't stop eating cookies, right? Nobody's addicted to corn on the cob, but when we isolate the sugar in that and we produce high fructose corn syrup, then we've got people who can't stop eating the products that contain those. You see? And it's because that dopamine release is being so profoundly triggered compared to what you would get from eating normal, natural foods in their whole food state, okay? So the food industry, they isolate ingredients, and this may perpetuate kind of that food addiction in some, and what we're seeing is that it's an overconsumption of sugary foods. We also isolate fat in a lot of foods and get really concentrated fat sources. And then eventually, you get a decreased sensitivity to that dopamine. In other words, you're so used to eating these processed foods high in sugar and fat, all of a sudden the same release of dopamine isn't enough, right? No different than with drug addiction. The same amount all of a sudden is not enough to produce the same effect, okay? It changes your brain's chemistry, and it can also change how you experience other activities. So certain things that may bring you pleasure, now that amount of pleasure may be lessened because your brain requires a larger release of dopamine to experience the same amount of pleasure and satisfaction. Crazy, right? So the bottom line is you will overeat these foods to try to achieve the same amount of satisfaction that you had previously.
It's like alcohol, you drink every day, you don't feel it.
Right, you build up a tolerance. You've got to have more to get the same effect. So the same thing has kind of happened with our processed foods, right? And then you go and you eat something like a salad and you're like, this is so bland and it does nothing for me. I don't get that same release of dopamine and that feeling of satisfaction, right?
I have the doctor that salad up real good.
Right, yeah.
Enjoy it.
Right, exactly. So what he says, though, eating green light foods, and if you're not familiar with these terms, the stoplight terminology, and it's been used for a long time as kind of a guide for people of what to eat. So it's, just like a stoplight, green, yellow, and red. Green light foods mean go. Means these are healthy foods. These are the ones we want you to eat. Yellow light foods means like whoa, use caution, slow down. In other words, a little bit of these foods is okay, but eat in moderation. Whereas red light foods are stop, avoid these foods. And so that stop lighting kind of nutrition labeling, they've used throughout the country, actually throughout the world in different places. And recently there was a part of a pilot study, part of the O2 project here in the medical center, done over in Lantern, where there was stop lighting labels on different foods throughout to see if it made a difference in what our employees chose to purchase. So green light foods are the good foods. These are the vegetables, the whole grains, the beans, all the things on his daily Doveson prescription. So basically they prevent that numbing of the pleasure center in our brain. When we consistently eat green light foods, okay, then we don't have our brain chemistry get out of whack to where we need a higher level to get the same effect. But you've got to eat them consistently. It also can help return dopamine to normal sensitivity. So in other words, if you're somebody who has struggled and you're this, what I described in the last slide is something you can relate to, then one of the things that eating healthier foods can do is help you to get back to normal. Just like it's kind of a transition period basically that you have to go through to kind of retrain your body to understand what normal levels of dopamine and sugar, all that stuff should be. Questions on that? So I guess his basic overall point with the eating healthy is it's not just about disease prevention, okay? It can also be about, eating healthy can really impact how we experience other parts of our life, right? Because if we're used to really high levels of dopamine, and that's what it takes to feel that kind of pleasure and enjoyment, then all of a sudden anything that doesn't cause that seems very underwhelming. Y'all with me?
So what you just explained now tells me what I've experienced, which now I understand why. Once you stop eating all the sugar products and flour products, after a while, you don't crave them.
Right.
Like you did. I mean, that's what I had found.
Exactly. Your brain chemistry kind of normalizes, and all of a sudden, you don't need that, dopamine, that big dopamine hit, so to speak, to experience enjoyment. The other thing too I've found with people who have really made an effort to cut out processed foods and that kind of stuff in their diet is after a while they'll come and they'll be like, different fruits and vegetables and things, they're so flavorful, and like you don't appreciate it or really enjoy it the same as when you're used to really sweetened foods or really high-fat, rich foods, right? When you're eating ice cream or something like that that's really rich and sugary and fatty, and then all of a sudden you eat like a tomato is going to taste very bland, right? And it's not going to give you the same satisfaction as some of those other foods. You see how that cycle can perpetuate? So unfortunately, it does take you've got to go through that period of transition where you're almost detoxing in a way, back down to normal foods. Yeah.
So I have an issue.
Okay.
And the problem I have on a daily basis is that I try to eat healthy. And I shop. I go to actually get what I feel is healthy. No junk food, no processed canned food. And I eat that. And I eat big portions.
Okay.
To satisfy my hunger. But after eating that healthy portion, I still feel that it doesn't hit. I don't feel that my hunger is served. It's like I want to eat more to
You don't feel satisfied, or
I
you
don't
still feel
satisfied.
hungry?
And it could be that, I don't know, like, I eat one burger from Chick-fil-A, and I feel like, okay, I'm done.
Totally
If I eat like
satisfied.
3 plates of salad with healthy chicken in it, and I don't feel that I hit that sweet spot, oh, you know what, now I feel good, I'm done. So eating healthy is what I want, but
Right.
I don't have control over telling my brain, hey, now I feel
That's
that I have to walk
satisfying.
away.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I'm necessarily like the premier expert on brain chemistry and that kind of stuff, but I'll do my best to give you an answer. So, how long have you been doing it?
See, this is the thing. I've been doing it for almost more than 6 months,
Okay.
but it's on and off. I follow it, and then I go back to some of the other food which I don't want to
Yeah.
eat.
Yeah.
So like,
Well, the
I'm
other
able
thing
to
too
maintain
is,
consistency in that.
I don't think anybody's advocating that, everybody get to the point where they're completely satisfied with salad, day in, day out, that kind of thing. You still need to, it may have more to do with the nutrient content or macronutrient content of your meals. For example, fat is one of the things that's really important to include in your diet for satiety. We have to have a certain amount of fat. Now that doesn't mean we want it to be a greasy burger or French fries,
Right.
those kind of sources of fat. but having healthy fats, maybe in the form of nuts, seeds, more oils, that kind of thing. Avocado may be more satisfying and provide that satiety. So it may have more to do with how you're cooking, what kind of techniques, and the combination of foods you're using,
Gotcha.
that kind of thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be boring and totally simple. We still want it to have flavor and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So it may be more with your recipes and that kind of stuff than,
Have to experiment with you.
yeah. But then there is that thing, if you're back and forth between healthy and unhealthy, it's kind of hard
Yeah,
for maybe your brain to say,
yeah, so letting it go.
right, wow, that was
Go
great
for it.
today. I really loved that salad. It's way better than the burger yesterday. You know what I mean? You're still getting those
Right.
higher levels of dopamine from time to time.
Maybe if he adds some more beans or quinoa
Mm-hmm.
or sweet potatoes, that'll be more filling
Yeah.
with your protein or
Or
something like
nuts.
you said.
It's not that I feel that I ate enough. I feel it, but it just the satisfaction
They
is
don't
not
stay.
there.
Well, and
It's
there's
hard for me
two
to like-
sides of eating. There's the hunger part that tells us physically we need to eat, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times
That's what
that
I'm
can
doing
be
with healthy
satisfied,
things. I just
but it's
foreign.
the satiety center where you say that was a satisfying meal,
Mhm.
right? Which is separate from hunger.
Exactly.
Right? So another thing to consider too is when you start looking at the amount of different foods you eat. So for example, I like to call this the buffet effect. Okay? People always eat more when there's more options. Okay? Why is that? So let's say it's Thanksgiving and you've got 20 different dishes, right? Because if your family's like mine, there's always, at least 3 dishes per person. So you've got all these different things. Well, if you just eat a little bit, that's usually people's strategy. I'm just going to take a little bit of everything, okay? So you take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. So your brain only gets a tiny bit of each thing, all right? You've got to have a certain amount of each thing before your brain says, oh, I'm satisfied, I don't need any more of that. Have y'all ever had that feeling? And this is what I'm talking about that you may be able to relate to better. That feeling of, oh, I really want some whatever. I don't know, give me something you crave. Cookies, I really want some cookies. So you eat like 6, and then you're like, oh, that was disgusting, I feel terrible, I don't even want to see another cookie. Right? So that's your satiety part of your brain has been satisfied because you ate plenty of whatever it was that you were craving. Okay? When you eat just that little bit, that satiety part of your brain never gets to the point with anything that it's tired of it. So even though physically you may be going, I'm full, I'm not hungry, you're still sitting there eating and going back for more and more and more, right? So if you are having a large variety of foods when you cook, that could contribute to that too. Because you're not ever fully satisfied or sick of eating what you have on your plate. Does that make sense? Okay, so that could be another thing. Yes?
I know for me with, I didn't think that I craved anything until I, was eating bad and I started eating, said, okay, I'm going to eat healthy. And I ate healthy. So I didn't feel that I was craving the stuff I left behind because I knew what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I was eating healthy and then I said, okay, oh wow, they, it's after Christmas, they had all this chocolate on sale. And so I bought all this chocolate and I just started eating on it, every day I was having some of it. And then when it was all gone, then I was really craving that.
Kind of re-stimulated that.
And so, and in order to get away from it, I just had to go through the withdrawals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
That
had to withdraw.
detox, yeah. Yeah, it's true, it's true. So, does some of that make sense? A lot of it? It's kind of interesting, the psychology and chemistry of it all. So, when we're looking at the Daily Dozen, I've had a lot of people say to me throughout, gosh, there's these, are we okay on time? There's these 12 things, like, it doesn't seem like that big a deal, like there's a nice little checklist and all this, but how do you really do this?
Yeah.
You know, how do you really incorporate it all if it's something you're not doing already? So I'm hoping that these few tips will help. One thing to keep in mind is, and I usually tell all the clients that I work with this, is that what I like to think of things as is kind of 80-20, okay? And what you're doing 80% of the time, that is your lifestyle. Those are the collection of habits that are really going to impact your health, right? The 20% of the time, some of that is just kind of the times you slip up, the times you may just want to enjoy this, that, or the other, okay? That, as long as you're not doing that more frequently, that's not really going to make or break your health, okay? Think of it like in terms of finances. You can think of it this way too. 80% of the time, how you're spending your money and budgeting is what's really going to impact your financial standing, right? The 20% of the time when you got to go buy a new refrigerator or, you know, things like that happen, that's not really going to necessarily make or break you, right? It's what you're doing the majority of the time. So, you know, we want to aim for this, just like with anything. We want to aim to financially handle our money perfect all the time, right? Never have any hiccups or issues. But we do the best we can, and I like to give people that kind of, I don't know that it's a disclaimer, but realistic, I guess, perspective of we're not trying to be perfect here. So the first of all, he does have an app, okay, and it's Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen. You can download the app. It's going to give you this similar kind of checklist. So if you're a paper person, you can do this. If you're a digital person, check off each time you have one of these servings throughout your day. Just like any kind of food tracking, it's not necessarily something you have to do forever, but when you're trying to create new habits, it's a very helpful tool to do for 3, 4, 6 weeks at a time. What it helps you do is train you, okay? You're kind of training yourself to include these things in your diet. So that may be something that you find helpful. It also kind of keeps you accountable. You can look at the end of the day and see where the difficult areas are. Another thing I would encourage you to do is see what you're already doing, okay? So look at this and go, beans. How often do I eat beans? Does anybody eat 3 servings of beans a day? No. Maybe 1? Okay. So, but let's say you eat 1 a day. Okay, so you've got that. So right there you already have a goal that you could work towards. And we want small goals. I'm not an advocate of overhauling anything all at once. There's very few people that are successful that way. So maybe for the next month, you're going to work on just trying to add additional beans to your diet, and that's your focus, okay? Or maybe you've got beans knocked out every day, no problem. Maybe you need to work on flax seeds, okay? So do a little assessment of where you kind of line up right now with what's this at, and set some small goals to improve in the areas where you may be lacking, okay?
What's the definition of 1 serving here? Is it 1 3/4 cup or?
Well, you can look at his book. His servings and what he prescribes, some of them are a little bit off from what is generally the guideline. Okay, and it's all in here. You're welcome to look through here. And on his app, it actually has it. It also provides you options. It also provides you recipes for some of this stuff too. So it's pretty cool. Okay. Another thing to do is look for recipes that might incorporate multiple Daily Dozen things in the same recipe. Okay. So for example, something that might provide a mix of cruciferous vegetable with some of the spices, a whole grain, and beans, like some kind of salad. You know, look for dishes that incorporate a lot of things. That's going to make it easier. When you look at this, you know, my first thought is, I don't even think I eat that much food in one day. How am I going to fit all this in, right? We got to look for some ways to combine it, okay? His cookbook is coming out too. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. So he's going to have a Daily Dozen cookbook. I'm hoping to get it and do some food demos with some of the recipes out of it. So maybe that will help if we can find some of these things that incorporate multiple things. Set your office, your kitchen, your car, all these things up for success, okay? This goes to say, even if you're following the Daily Dozen or not. We want to try to make the healthy choice the easy choice for us, okay? So if you've got your car loaded up with leftover candy bars from Halloween, and then you're like, well, I really should be eating flaxseed crackers, okay? Probably not going to go so well, right? So bring some of these foods. Think about that. What are some things I could bring to the office that would help me get in some of these Daily Dozen and make the healthy choice the easy choice? So nuts, seeds, whole grain stuff, whole grain crackers, things like that. Oh, I could drink green tea all day long while I'm at the office, right? I can drink water all day long while I'm at the office. I'm going to keep a water bottle in my car. Berries, fruits, other things like that. Make sure that's what you're stockpiling in the places that you normally eat, okay? Which brings me to create a Daily Dozen grocery list. And that's really why I printed this one out for you guys. This is not from Dr. Greger. It's from another source, the Veganuary. Because I liked that it had examples on here. So you could literally take this to the grocery store, and as you're going, be like, okay, I need beans. Here's a couple of different choices. What am I going to choose, right? I need berries. Throw some of these in your cart. And if you've got stuff that you're bringing home, you can bring stuff to the office, keep it in your car, wherever, then you're setting yourself up for these choices to be the easy one, right? Keep going also. A lot of times what people tend to do is I'm doing the Daily Dozen, I'm doing the whole thing, I'm doing the whole 30, I'm doing this or that or the other, right? They're full on, 100% committed, and then the second that they don't do it 100%, what happens? Forget it. I'm eating burgers and fries. Can't do this. Okay? That's not going to help. So keep going. That's another recommendation. This should be something that we aspire to do, right? This should be our ultimate goal. We're not going to expect to do this straight out of the gates. That's why it's helpful to kind of break it down into some smaller goals. Look at the areas where you're really lacking. Like I said, when you do that assessment. Maybe you do all of these things from time to time, but just not every day, or just not as many servings per day as he's recommending, and kind of see where you need to work instead of putting so much pressure on yourself to do it all at once, okay? And then this is my big thing too. We're aiming for progress. We're not aiming for perfection, okay? So keeping that in mind. Again, this is the ideal we may be working towards. We may or may not get there 100%. But anything you do that's a little bit better than yesterday is an improvement, right? So that's kind of what we want to aim for. So I don't know if this is what y'all wanted as far as putting it all together, but I think that for a lot of people, as we've gone through this book over the past year, I mean, it's there's pretty high expectations, right? And I think for some people, which is why those physical activity guidelines may have been dumbed down to 20 minutes, that's intimidating. And you kind of think, I can never achieve that, so why bother, okay? I don't want anybody to feel that way with this stuff. That's why these are kind of the recommendations for how to put it all together. I'm not saying that what he's prescribing and recommending isn't wonderful and that we should not do that. We should aim to do that, but we got to work to get there, right?
So what do you think about supplements? Like, if you can't get to all of this, but you can take a supplement like a green supplement, wheatgrass supplement, because I bought some, and then I knew that I wouldn't always be able to get all the greens, so I got a supplement just to take, maybe every other day. Is that okay? What do you think about that?
So I'm not a huge proponent of supplements, and Dr. Greger in his book addresses that stuff, and you're welcome to borrow my book and read those sections or whatever. The issue with supplements, there are certain supplements that are safe and can provide you with the same benefits as eating the whole foods. But on the whole, most supplements are not necessarily ideal for a couple of reasons. We know that the nutrients from foods are absorbed better than from supplements. The other thing is supplements there's no regulation of most of them by the FDA. unlike drugs or pharmaceuticals, which are regulated, supplements, a lot of times, which can act in medicinal ways, they can act like a pharmaceutical and have that kind of power, but they're not regulated. And so there's not a consistent blend, there's not a consistent recipe, there's no standards to ensure that they are safe or providing necessarily what they claim to provide, if that makes sense. The other thing too, which he has pointed out a couple times in the book, is that a lot of times what we think, well, if we eat this, then concentrating the specific ingredient from that will be even better. Okay. One of the example he used in there that I'm thinking of is with turmeric. Okay. And people think, oh, well, I'll take a turmeric supplement because I don't necessarily want to eat it or can't use it in a dish all the time. But when you look at studies, sometimes it's not necessarily just what they think is the effective ingredient that is causing the impact or the benefit. Does that make sense? So, I'm not a huge advocate of supplements.
That's why I tried to get it in powder form and organic.
I would like to comment on that. To be honest, so I take them in B12 because I'm low and my doctor told me to take pills. And you have to take it bilingual, so you have to put it under your tongue for it to absorb efficiently. But it still doesn't do its job. I take 2000 IU, it hardly gets into my stream about 20% only. So the rest all goes to waste, I don't know where it goes. But overall, personal experience, the supplements tend to cause huge amount of side effects on your kidney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
This can damage your kidney very slowly, and you can't feel any side effects. You don't know, you won't get any symptoms too, but it's affecting your kidney in the long run. And personal story, I know it firsthand. But all the supplements, avoid it.
Yeah.
And just have natural food.
I've been down that line.
Yeah, you just have to be really careful.
Really careful about
And like
this.
with greens and stuff like that, again, there's probably not enough research to say exactly what component of greens is effective. I guess what I didn't say earlier was they don't think it's just one component. There's not usually an isolated component in anything that's the reason for the impact. It's usually the combination of stuff within there. So if you are taking a concentrated form of something, you may be missing out on the overall benefits. So anyway, other questions or anything? Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So I hope you guys, if you've come to any of these, enjoy this series. Like I said, in the new year, we'll be doing some cooking demos with some of the stuff from his cookbook, as well as other cookbooks, to try to, I think for a lot of people, a plant-based diet is a little intimidating. And how do I do this? How do I make it taste good? And some of those things. So our focus in FY18 is going to be kind of how we can incorporate more plant-based foods into our diet and some of these things on the Daily Dozen. Okay? All right. Thank you guys for coming. Have a happy holiday. We'll see you in the new year.